admit something.
You're going to admit something?
I don't know if it's safe to admit.
All right.
So this family wanted me to come out and do a graveside service. And I asked them, do you want me to prepare a sermon? And they said no. So I didn't prepare a sermon.
Oh, that's right. This is the graveside service that was...
that I drug you to.
Yeah. Well, and so it wasn't like the funeral and then the graveside service.
Yeah, it was
later.
just a graveside service.
Yep.
And I said, do you want me to prepare a sermon? They said no. And I asked them again, you sure you don't want me to prepare a sermon? Do you just want me to do the rite? Just go through the book. And they said yes. And I said, okay. So we get there. And they say, and Pastor, we've already talked about it. This is what we want to do. We want to do it in this order. And here's where you can put your sermon.
This is 10 minutes before the graveside service starts. And
oh my gosh. This is I can't believe I'm actually admitting this into the internet. So this person now, they're talking about her. The family members are talking about her. And she had Alzheimer's. And she died of complications that are common to if you had Alzheimer's disease. And so I get up there. I swear, I didn't know how else to start this sermon. Oh, God, forgive me. I got up there and I said, so I've been thinking a lot about the role of memory lately. So it's like, oh my gosh. What do you do when it's on the fly, right? So I just admitted that out loud.
Yep.
Because they caught me off guard because I asked them twice and they said no sermon. And then suddenly there's a sermon. And she died of Alzheimer's. I do, though, want to talk about the role of memory today.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the role of memory today because I think it's an important topic when it comes to trauma, right?
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of people walking around and they may be aware of their personal trauma. They may not be aware of their personal trauma. And I am not a clinical psychologist. I do not have a psychology degree.
I'm not either.
And I'm just jawing a little bit today about what I see from a pastoral perspective, Because, when you work with people, when you share life with people and you love them, you see an awful lot of pain. You see an awful lot of brokenness.
Well,
and then you see the effects of that.
Well, and let's unpack trauma, too, because you might hear trauma and think that just means somebody that was abused horribly as a kid or something really terrible.
Can mean that.
It can mean that, certainly. But when we talk about the role of memory and trauma, we're talking about a wide range of different things. It could be trauma about making sense of a spouse that died, or trauma that making sense of...
Or you lost a business, or
you lost a job, I was thinking that.
You lost your job, and it was really hard for your family.
What's my identity coming out of that? Or maybe you went through a divorce, something like that, or...
It's anything that causes this crisis of self, really. And what I think I'm seeing as a pastor is that when somebody goes through something really hard, it can be years later and they still talk about that thing that happened to them. This could be 20, 30 years later. They'll still talk about that thing that happened like it happened yesterday.
Yep.
And that tells me, and by the way, you get this at the level of congregations too, by the way. Somebody would come up and say, well, Pastor, we tried that one. You come up with a new evangelism program. Some people come, well, Pastor, we tried that once and it didn't work very well. I said, well, tell me more about that. And it turns out they tried something like 20 years ago.
It was 1988.
And they're talking about it like it was last week. Like we tried that last week and it didn't work. And it's just, but people do that. Or they'll say, well, we had a pastor years ago who was a drunk or a womanizer or whatever. And then they stick that on the new pastor.
Yep.
Like, he's not even the same guy. He's not even the same cat. And you're sitting there talking about this, A, like it happened yesterday, and B, like the new pastor is going to act like the old pastor. He's not going to act the same as the old pastor, literally in any way, from preaching to teaching to administration to
you name it.
Leadership skills or capacity to the sins that he personally struggles with or succumbs to. So, because everybody's different. And so trying to put what happened 20 years ago on the new guy, when this is a new guy,
Yep.
doesn't work. But people do it all the time. And one of the things that I think they're doing, and this is just my personal opinion about something, Dan, I think what they're doing is that they're misunderstanding the role of memory. What's memory good for? So I mean, I just ask you, like, why did God give us the capacity to create and store memories? Like, what's the point of memory?
So a few things come to mind for me. Part of it's to learn. Part of it's to grow.
Okay.
Part of it's to, I think about family members that have passed on, and that you can still tell stories. You can laugh. You can cry. You can it's a way to still live in a sense.
So it's a memorial without a headstone.
Yeah.
Memory can become a memorial of sorts. Yeah.
And a way to kind of live vicariously for different things that you did once upon a time, and whether you laugh, whether you cry, whether you whatever happens to be. I mean, it can be cathartic. It can be a whole bunch of things that are really useful.
Right. But let's start with the first thing you said. The first thing out of your mouth wasn't remembering that awesome, so that you could remember that awesome vacation you took with your wife that one time.
When my wife and I went to Hawaii and we had tons of fun. And
right. Yeah. Which is great that you can relive that experience.
True, we did,
right. And it's great that you can relive that experience. The very first thing out of your mouth, though, was what? What was the role of memory?
To learn and to grow.
To learn.
Yeah.
To learn something. It's not the only role of memory, but it's a very important role of memory, is to learn something from past experiences that you can then apply to future challenges. So the role, I would sum it up that way, the role of memory, or one of the main reasons God gave us the capacity to make and store memories, is because we want to learn something from a past experience that we can then apply to future challenges. And when I say future challenges, I'm saying that whatever happened in the past is not going to be the same thing that happens in the future. Now, it might share some similarities, but it's not going to be exactly the same thing. So we're not learning from something that happened in the past so that the next time that happens, we now can face it differently. That's not, because how I harp on the thinking, let's make sure this never happens again. That kind of corporate America thinking. How do we ensure, gentlemen, that this never happens again? Harumph, harumph, and just hit the table. That's not, I hate that kind of thinking. I think that's dangerous in a lot of ways. But because for one, that kind of thinking is not being true to who people are as sinners, okay, first of all. But the other thing, though, is that what people are basically saying is that they think that they're going to be able to learn something from what just happened that they're then going to be able to apply to when the exact same thing happens again. But the exact same thing will never happen again, most likely.
Yep.
So what that means is we're trying to learn something from a certain set of circumstances that happened in a particular context, in a particular point in time, that we can then apply that learning to a new set of challenges that will occur one day in the future. And when that's not what you do with your memory, when you don't use your memories to think about what can I learn that I apply to completely new challenges in the future, you end up, I think, it's like watching people, they're like in a time loop. You ever see this? They're talking about something like it happened yesterday. You talk to an 80-year-old couple, and he cheated on her 45 years ago because they've been married for 50 years or something. He cheated on her 45 years. He's never cheated on her ever again. He learned his lesson. He's real sorry about it, and they've had a real good marriage, and they've raised some real good kids, and they've got some real good grandkids. And by all indications on the outside, they've healed. But she still bring it up. I bet you still think about that. No, I don't. We're all old. What are you talking about? But you see these people, they get stuck in a time warp, a time loop. Have you seen this?
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think what I'm going to do here, too, to kind of paint a picture of this, too, is personalize a little bit.
Yeah.
That's all right. And on one level, we talk about what you learn in memory. It can be really practical.
Yeah, it can be.
So I'm going to share two things about my dad.
Okay.
Personalize it quick.
Wow, speaking of memory
Yeah.
and the capacity to make new memories and to hold on to them, that was
Yeah.
affected for him near the end.
Well, yes, but I'm actually going to talk
Yeah.
more about my memories of him.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And in a couple different ways that it's manifested itself.
Okay, now I'm with you.
And one side of it, I'll say, my dad taught me how to change oil in a car,
Right,
and I remember how to do that.
right.
In a very practical way, I'll admit I don't always do it now. I'm more inclined to take my car and have it done.
Well, but that would be an example of a life skill of a situation that will happen the exact same way every time.
Well, I was
When
gonna,
it's practical like that, maybe you can have something that happens the same way.
I was going to pick it apart a little bit. That
Yeah.
it's a different car, so it's slightly different. The oil filter's in a slightly different spot.
Yeah,
and
but I mean, it's-
I'm
Motor oil's motor oil,
Yeah, yeah.
son. Motor oil's motor oil. That's, you know.
But what happened if something in that analogy, so to speak,
Right.
went awry in how my dad taught me to change motor oil? That then
Mm-hmm.
ends up creates that loop. And the thing I'm going to share about my dad. So those that aren't aware, my dad had MS. He was diagnosed when I was a kid. He gradually got sicker as I was an adult.
Mhm.
He passed away, over a decade ago. But something I've had to realize in terms of the things that I remember about when he was sick
Mm-hmm.
is how much they might influence things in a negative way in my relationships now. And
Okay.
I'm going to give one.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
gonna
gonna say, you
I'm
probably
gonna
need to
give
unpack that a
one
little
concrete
bit. Yeah.
example, and I'll just describe this as trauma for me.
Right.
In the sense of that spectrum.
Well, I mean, I think that would count.
Yeah.
Your dad dying in front of you. That's I'm sure
One of the
it's-
things I saw from my dad sometimes
Yeah.
as he got sicker was people not understanding it very well. I mean, he eventually was in a wheelchair.
Right.
You mentioned he struggled with memory. There's different things like that.
Right.
And there were moments that he got treated with disrespect.
Okay.
And I don't know that it was always intentional. I don't know that it was, malicious or anything
Yeah.
like that, but he got treated with disrespect. And I know that rooted in me, and it's partly rooted in seeing the way that I felt because I saw the way he was treated, that respect for me is really important.
Yeah.
In terms of how I'm talked to, in terms of how I'm
Right.
treated. And to bring all this together in terms of how do I remember whatever those feelings are that I had for my dad.
So when I walk into your office and I say, "What's up, Dumbo?" Like you
Yeah.
probably don't like that a lot.
No,
Yeah.
actually, that's not. It's yeah.
I don't call him that.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't do that.
But
Yeah.
it's happened in my marriage.
Oh, okay. Where you see, and that's a completely different,
It's a completely different dynamic.
Different
It's a completely
relationship,
different
yeah.
relationship.
and yet,
But if my wife says
Yeah.
something to me that makes me feel disrespected, I have to be really careful
right.
that I'm really just responding to what she said and not some other memory that gets brought into it about my dad that has nothing to do with it.
There you go.
And then I'm overreacting to her.
There you go. And
because
that's-
I have this pain that gets
Yeah.
brought back up.
And that's what I'm talking about. That people get stuck in that time loop. It's like a time warp. Suddenly, you're back at this other situation
And I'm reacting to my wife.
that
in
has
a way-
nothing to do with what's going on right now in real time.
And all she said was something about taking the trash to the curb and
Right.
something simple. And
Right. I think it's really super important for people to learn from past successes in life, and it's very important to learn from past failures.
Mhm.
We learn an awful lot by failing. And nobody likes to fail. I'm competitive enough. I don't like to fail. But the older I get, the more I'm thankful for every time I failed
and
because of what it teaches you.
the permission to fail forward, that failure could be opportunity to learn, to grow,
Right.
to.
But
pick
if you
yourself-
don't learn from it in order with the mindset that I'm applying this lesson to future challenges, which will be, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't see what the future is going to bring. But if I don't have the mentality that I am learning this lesson to apply to future challenges that will be very different than the one I just lived through,
Mhm.
then it happens to me, it happens to people I work with as a pastor. You get caught in a time loop where you're not really learning from that set of circumstances to apply it to a new challenge. You just keep trying not to repeat an unpleasant memory from your past. Does that make sense what
Yep.
I'm saying?
You're trying to repeat the unpleasant memory in your past, or you're projecting
Mhm.
the emotions of that unpleasant memory on someone else.
Yeah.
And how important that is, I think, when we talk about this in terms of roles for you and I as pastors, and just walking a walk of discipleship about
Mhm.
how are we here to shepherd and care and point people back to Jesus and remind them that He loves them. or in the sense of preaching, or even in the sense of the church more broadly, that,
Well, again, I'm going.
members of the church have a role as they walk with
I'm-
somebody that's struggling with something. And,
Well, what did you do for your church health when something bad happened at your church? What are we learning as a group of people together? That's what that's just as important at the corporate level as it is at the individual level. So, when people say, well, we try, I'm making fun of something simple like, well, we tried that in the past. But take the preaching that you and I did going into the capital campaign for the campus expansion. We're building a brand new sanctuary, right? Very excited about that. So praise God. But there were so many people, because of past hurts in the history of this congregation, that they were like, yeah, well, I'll believe it when I see it, and it's the attitude was so negative.
It's the fact that we moved out here 20 years ago, and then there's been this sense of unfulfilled promises about the sanctuary.
I know, but
no, I'm describing it for anybody that's listening.
Oh yeah, sure. But what I'm saying is that if you don't learn from your past failures, even as a corporate group of people, then all you do when some new leader shows up and says, "Hey, why don't we get this done?" You
want to do this?
Yeah, you want to do that? Let's do it. Yeah. And when somebody shows up and says, "Hey, let's do this," everybody sits there and goes, "Well, we've been hurt before." Okay, so let's not do that again. But we could, do something different.
How can we be excited about the fact that we're doing it?
Right, and that's what I'm talking about. It happens to individuals. It happens to people at a corporate level too. Whatever pain you faced because you lived. Think about that for a second. No, really think about this for a second. Whatever pain you experienced because you simply lived.
Except for those of you that somehow have a perfect life and everything goes great.
Right, yeah. The pain you experienced because you simply lived your life doesn't have to dictate walking into the future like, I say it's like a middle school dance. Like a middle school dance where the kids aren't really, confident, and they walk in kind of like they expect to be punched in the face at any minute, you know what I mean? They kind of walk in like that, and then the boys stand on one wall and the girls stand on the...
There's just lots of awkwardness.
Yes, a lot of awkward... You don't have to actually walk into the future like it's a middle school dance. You can walk into the future with a little bit of, dare I say, confidence that maybe God will work everything out. It's... And I hate to sound preacherly and bring everything back to an issue of faith, but usually everything comes back to whether or not you put your trust in God or you put your trust in your ability to, again, that time warp, that time loop thing I'm talking about, to never have this happen again. And that negative thing that happened to you. If you live your life, you will experience both pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow. It just means you lived. You should be just as proud of your scars as you are of the laugh lines under your eyes.
Well, so here's where I'll go next with this, to get preacherly a little bit too, but let's look at King David.
Yeah. That's a good example.
King David.
Because we know a lot about his life, and it was all chronicled, even the bad stuff, right?
The times where King Saul, David's been anointed king, but he's not king yet. King Saul's chasing after him, trying to kill him. King David had a bunch of problems with his family.
Yeah.
Whole bunch of different things. But then it goes to, is it Psalm 51? Create in me a clean heart, O God, restored.
Yeah, a steadfast spirit within me. Yeah.
That he's calling out to God to help him still have that Holy Spirit working in his heart, that even though I've gone through all these times I've been hurt, there's times I've been disappointed,
some of what happened to me, other people did to me.
Yep.
Some of what happened to me, I did to myself, especially if you talk about Psalm 51, because this is after the whole Bathsheba incident. So no one else hurt him. He hurt himself. Because sometimes we're just so dumb.
He committed adultery and then he committed murder.
Yeah, sometimes we're just so dumb. We go through a series of decisions where we injure ourselves. It's not what somebody else did to me. It's what I did to me.
Yep.
I'm a moron, right? David's capacity for saying, I gotta start new, I gotta start fresh. He's going to learn those lessons. He says, I'm completely sinful. Like if I ever had a thought in my head like maybe I'm not as bad as other people, That's gone by Psalm 51. He said, I was conceived in sin. I was sinful from my mother's womb. He's saying, I have to realize that I am the problem. It's me. It's not somebody else. It's not pointing the finger. I have some baloney about me and the way I'm wired in my own life that I have to face head on. And he's facing it in that psalm, right? But then he says, but I need a new fresh start, and only you can give it. And he turns to God for that. So he's going to learn those lessons, and he's going to apply those to future challenges. But he's not looking to try to simply erase a bad memory. Does that make sense?
He's not trying to erase the bad memory to make it go away, but he's asking,
or to say it didn't happen,
or just going to try harder and do better next time. He's saying, God, I need your help.
Yeah.
Help restore me in a way.
And I think that the testament to the fact that he wasn't trying to get rid of a bad memory or just cover it over is the fact that he allowed his life to be chronicled so accurately. I mean, he's the king. He could have had that stricken from the record.
He could have had a whitewashed history previously.
Yeah, he could have had like a holy history is what I call these things.
Look how great of a warrior I was. And
I was awesome and brave and gallant and all these things. And he could have come out looking like King Arthur, like a myth. It's a mythology at that point. But he allowed it to be written the way it actually happened, and he didn't try to change it. And that's a quiet admission from the standpoint of history that he's not just trying to get rid of bad memories, either by how he responds to future challenges or by just trying to act like something never happened. He's facing it head on, and he's learning his lesson, but he's going to apply that lesson to future challenges.
And I think with all that too, as far as applying to whatever the next thing is, here's where my brain's going right now, is the fact that, in as much as if we're talking about you and I as pastors here and the ways that we can walk with people that are hurting, or even our own hurts that we have, or the ways that as an organization you've got people that walk with one another, different members, or just as an institution or as a community, whatever those things are, that, it's, I think here in Lincoln, Nebraska, I grew up here, and I think we have a tendency to sometimes just kind of shove stuff down a little bit or a lot.
Push it way, way down.
I'm fine.
And if you can bury it under some alcohol, that's even better, right? I mean, that's kind of the...
And I'm not advocating that somehow we all of a sudden just air all of our dirty laundry with
No, because you can't. That's not realistic.
But permission...
First of all, other people don't want to hear all of it. That's not realistic, right?
But permission for a little bit of honesty with one another.
Sure.
Just to say, hey, here's something I'm struggling with. And the vulnerability there to know that because we're forgiven and redeemed in Jesus Christ, God shows that mercy, that we have the opportunity to love and walk with one another, to show some mercy to each other. Not that we fix it, not that it just makes the pain and the hurts go away, or that, that somehow the next time you're faced with that same memory that you're gonna do it differently the first time, but that you continue to look for those ways that God can be at work to help you not just be stuck in that loop, but to maybe look at it a little bit differently. Maybe God puts people around you to help you do that. Maybe in your prayer life, your devotional life, your study of God's Word, maybe there's ways that the Spirit does stir your heart to look at things differently. I mean, there's lots of ways this could go.
And I think that's important, because if you don't just look at memory as some psychologist is going to tell me I'm overplaying my hand here, and that's okay. I may be overplaying my hand. Write to my email. But if you don't primarily look at your memories as a way of learning a lesson that you apply to future challenges, then one of the things that I think ends up happening. Oh, did I derail my train of thought? I may have. I derailed my train of thought. That's terrible. Because I built a front porch on it, and then I forgot where I was going with it. But I do think... Oh, I now remember what I was going to say.
Right.
So... one of the things that happens, though, if you don't look for the lesson to be learned here to apply to a future challenge, is that you don't recognize the creep that happens in your memories anyway. So in other words, no one's ever really remembering what actually happened. They're remembering their perception of it. Your perception of what happened changes over time. You might get the chronological order of what happened out of whack over time. You mean there's creep and decay in memory over time, and so
your brain's kind of just grabbing a bunch of different pieces and trying to put the puzzle back together.
Right,
that's kind of my sense of it.
And God knows that too about memory.
Yep.
So let me show you a place where it's very clear that God knows exactly how He made us, exactly how our brains function, and exactly what both the advantages and disadvantages of memory really are. It's at the altar. It's at the Lord's table. So He says, do this in remembrance of me. Do this as my memorial. Because He doesn't have a grave, because He's not there anymore, right? His tomb is empty. So there's no tombstone. There's no pilgrimage site to go to. I mean, I know we say it's the Holy Sepulchre, but I mean,
Yeah.
was it? Who knows? But it's cool. We'll just say it was, and that's fine. Maybe it was. But like, there's really no pilgrimage site in that sense, right? So what is His memorial? It's these groups of people all around the world who every Sunday go back to the upper room together, and they're there at the table, and He says, this is my body, this is my blood, do this for the forgiveness of sins, do this in remembrance of me. And we rehearse that over and over and over again. And why do we rehearse it? Because memory does decay over time, and this is a way of going back there as a community. Right? In this case, the goal is not so much to learn a lesson as it is to be reminded of where we place our trust. Right?
You're in the midst of this broken world and you're trying to remember where Jesus is. You're trying to remember where you can find Him.
Right.
He's saying, here's the one spot you can always find me.
You can always come back here and find me. But again, it's not to relive His gruesome crucifixion. We talk about that crucifixion and what that has accomplished for us, but it's not a morbid thing. And early Christians were accused of being cannibals. They were accused of being weirdly morbid, that's not what we're doing. That's not what we understand that we're doing. We're not going back to that supper to relive it in that sense, but we are going back to be reminded where we can place our faith, because after this supper, we're going to go right back out in the world, and there's no table.
Yep.
And so we're applying the reminder of where we place our faith and our trust before we go back out and face new challenges, but now in light of what has been accomplished for us in a cross and an empty tomb. That table and that role of memory there is extremely important for how we face the challenges that we do face every single day in the middle of a lost, broken, often evil, flat-out evil world that we live in. And you have to get that memory right. So that's why when you come back to the table, I just say the words again. I don't mess with it. I don't rap on a theme. I just say the words again, because that memory has to stay locked. And it would be easy for that memory to decay or to see some creep if pastors got up in front of the Lord's table and just started rapping on a theme. Well, it's kind of like this. No, it's not. Just say the words again. Keep that memory intact for people, because memory does decay over time. And then for the corporate body, that memory is now fixed. And what we're learning, or what we are remembering, is where we put our trust before we go out and face the challenges we're going to face today.
Which then becomes the healthy memory that helps loop.
Right.
So that you're connected back to Jesus' body and blood. You're connected back to the reminders of everything that He did at the cross and the empty tomb. So that when you're in that moment and you're trying to learn and apply memory to new experiences, you're also applying that memory in terms of how you make sense of those new experiences.
Right. So, and when you don't do that, okay, you can tell when you're not doing that, because if for 2 seconds you get caught up in this idea, this fear or anxiety that somehow God's not going to take care of you, you're not remembering the table.
He's got a pretty good track record.
He's got an excellent track record, and He's going to take care of you. And when you catch yourself not remembering that, you're not going back to a memory for what memory is good for, which is, what's the lesson here? I can trust this guy. I can trust him. He literally took a bullet for me. I mean, not literally, right? Metaphorically, took a bullet for me, right? But He did literally die for me, right? And if this guy's willing to die for me, He's not going to leave me hanging today with whatever it is, the thing that I'm facing. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know how we're going to move through whatever this issue is that we're facing.
It doesn't mean it's not going to hurt sometimes. It doesn't
Right.
mean it's going to be
No.
easy, but
he's not going to abandon me.
no.
Because I have a core memory as part of the body of Christ at the corporate level that says, this is what he was willing to do for me. Okay. Well, let's apply that to this situation and see if it doesn't change our outlook. I bet it does.
I have forgiveness of sins, life, and salvation.
Yeah.
Maybe I feel a little different about
You mean
today.
I'm going to live forever? Cool. All right. Maybe we'll act like it today.
Yeah.
Maybe we actually just try to act like we're going to live forever today, because we are.
Yeah.
And that role of memory, Jesus is so smart, dude. I mean, I know that's kind of a stupid thing to say, because of course he's smart. But like, I love to say that. I love to praise the guy and say how smart he is. He's so smart because he set this up for us to where we could experience memory at a corporate level in a positive, affirming way that builds you up and encourages you, rather than in a time loop, time warp kind of way where you're stuck.
Well, and we say that the body and blood of Christ at the table sustain and strengthen us, and we, and it does spiritually, it does physically, it
Yeah.
does, but it's not like it's just magic, and it's amazing to think about it.
It's not ooga booga.
Yeah,
No.
that there's a psychological component of how God might be using this.
Well, your whole self is involved at the table,
Yeah.
right? Your whole self. You're there. When you're present at that table, you're there physically, you're there spiritually, you're there emotionally, and like you're saying, you're there psychologically. Your whole self is involved in this memory.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're reliving a memory, but we're not time looping it. We're not. It is a living memory that reminds us where we put our trust, teaches us all kinds of lessons about trust and about who our God is, that we then apply to whatever it is we're going to face when we walk out those doors.
And the amazing thing, that part of maybe how God sustained and strengthened us, is this reinforcing through memory to then apply that to the next day that's difficult, or the next day that's great, whichever it happens to be.
Or like most days, when it's a little bit of both.
Yep.
All right. Well, hey, I hope y'all remember to tune back in next time, and we'll keep these podcasts coming. See ya.